sì, vi posso dire che si risolve
Let's begin. President of the Senate, His Honor Reginald Farley, Honorable Trevor Prescott, Member of Parliament for St. Michael East, Principal of the Barbados Community College, Annette Allen, Senior Tutor, Division of General and Continuing Education, Dr. June Cadell, Registrar Roger Worrell, other senior tutors and staff of the Barbados Community College, Principal of the Christchurch Foundation School, David McCarthy, President of the Students Guild, Joshua Harris, specially invited guests, members of the media, students. Good evening all, and thank you for joining us virtually and in person for this evening's event. I'm your Master of Ceremonies, Lisa Broom. As you are aware, the BCC is celebrating 55 years of existence, renowned for delivering quality education to the nation. In fact, one of our assistant registrars recently described the BCC as a bedrock institution in Barbados, and certainly it is. Without having done any research at all, I am pretty confident that you will find a BCC graduate in almost every single household in Barbados, at least one in almost every business place, and I would venture to further say they hold positions at every level in various organizations. And that is the legacy we celebrate this evening as we gather here in the Liberal Arts Auditorium for this lecture, hosted by the Division of General and Continuing Education and put on as their active service as mandated by Principal Annette Allen. And now to officially welcome you this evening, I invite Ms. Allen to the podium. Ms. Allen.
Okay, President of the Senate of Barbados, His Honor Reginald Farley, Senator Reginald Farley, Mr. Roger Worrell, Registrar. I haven't seen Trevor Prescott, the Honorable Member of Parliament for St. Michael East. He's not here as yet. Okay, Dr. June Cadell, Senior Tutor in the Division of General and Continuing Education. Other members of the College Planning and Advisory Committee, Mr. David McCarthy, Principal of Christchurch Foundation School, members of staff, President of the Guild and Vice President of the Guild, other students, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I want to extend a warm welcome to you, Senator Reginald Farley, back to the Barbados Community College as a graduate. Y'all might not know this, but Senator Farley is a graduate of this esteemed institution. So we welcome you back to the Barbados Community College, and to all others, I welcome you to today's lecture, The Role and Functions of Parliament, a Reflective Analysis. Now this lecture is an activity, as has been pointed out already by Ms. Broom, associated with our month of giving, which is part of the college's celebration for our 55th anniversary. Each division or department of the college has been tasked with enacting strategies and initiatives that focus on giving back to our community. Now, some divisions and departments have interacted with primary schools in our catchment areas. Some have been assisting students who are experiencing financial challenges. And today, the Division of General and Continuing Education, as one of their initiatives, they have engaged the Honorable Senator Farley to deliver today's lecture. Now, this initiative allows our students to interact with an individual with experience in parliamentary functions. It affords them the opportunity to ask questions and engage in parlance. It allows them to pick the brains of an expert. Now, in this country, where our goal is to become world-class, tertiary education institutions such as the Barbados Community College are critical to achieving that goal, and education in all of its facets teaching, learning, and training transcends the walls of these institutions and necessitates community engagement, which is at the heart of our mandate here at the BCC. Producing graduates that are civic-minded, that understand the importance of accountability, that are cognizant of the need for respect for the environment and for positive cultural traditions. Graduates that can stand shoulder to shoulder with the best in the world. This is what we aim to accomplish at the Barbados Community College, and today's lecture will undeniably assist in achieving that goal. So I want to thank the senior tutor and members of staff from the Division of General and Continuing Education. I also want, on behalf of the Board of Management and staff and students at the Barbados Community College, to thank you, Senator Farley, for agreeing to deliver today's lecture and for giving back to the college community. Thank you.
Ms. Aline, thank you very much. Let's now welcome Dr. June Cadell, Senior Tutor in the Division of General and Continuing Education, to introduce our special guest. Dr. Cadell?
Thank you, Ms. Broom. It's a pleasure to be here. My task today is a very pleasant one. His Honor Senator Reginald Farley, JP, CPA, CMA, President of the Senate. Ms. Anna Allen, Principal of Barbados Community College. Mr. Roger Worrell, Registrar. Senior Tutors, Mr. David McCarthy, Principal of Christchurch Foundation School. Members of the media and other specially invited guests. Ladies and gentlemen all. The task of introducing our speaker this evening represents for me an honor and a privilege. Our guest tonight brings a wealth of experience gained across continents to share with us that we appreciate. His Honor Senator Reginald Farley, JP, CPA, CMA, became the President of the Senate of Barbados in September 2020. He's a Barbadian chartered accountant, consultant, former cabinet minister and diplomat who immediately prior to his appointment as President of the Senate was the High Commissioner of Barbados to Canada. Senator Farley holds the Chartered Professional Accountant designation from the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, CPA Canada, a BSc in Economics and Management from the University of the West Indies, and a teacher's diploma from Murdiston Teachers College. He's one of us, teacher. He is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, ICAB, and Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, Nova Scotia chapter. Senator Farley started his career as a teacher at the Roebuck Secondary School before moving to the Barbados Industrial Development Corporation as a business development officer, and then to the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry as its executive director. In 1994, Senator Farley became a Minister of Government and held the portfolios of Industry, Commerce, and Business Development, 1994 to 1999. Industry and International Business, 1999 to 2001. Economic Development, 2001 to 2003. Education, Youth Affairs and Sports, 2003 to 2006. And Housing and Lands, 2006 and 2008. When we say a wealth of experience, that's what we mean. That's what it covers. In the Parliament of Barbados, he served as a leader of government business in the Senate from 1994 to 1999, and later served as a Member of Parliament for Christchurch East from 1999 to 2008 with the Barbados Labour Party. He returned to the private sector after leaving government and became the Executive Director of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, 2009 to 2018. In 2018, he was appointed High Commissioner of Barbados to Canada and was based in Ottawa until his return to Barbados in September 2020 to become President of the Senate. In his private capacity, Senator Farley is a consultant whose area of focus includes regulatory compliance, financial management, governance, change management, strategic planning, and project management. Let us together welcome to the podium our featured speaker this evening, His Honor, Senator Reginald Farley, JP, CPA, CMA, President of the Senate of Barbados.
Thank you very much for that very warm welcome, Dr. Cadell. Madam Principal of the Barbados Community College, because we have another principal here, and he's the principal of my old school, the foundation school. So I hate being in a situation where I feel that I have to behave. But clearly I do. I'm under heavy manners. Registrar of the college, Mr. Roger Worrell, Dr. June Chandler, head of division, my good friend Mark Seal, who I'm trying to remember if he made mention of this event over beverages or otherwise. But somewhere along the line he had mentioned that perhaps he may want me to consider doing this. I never knew it would come to fruition. But I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share with you. You know, at my age, coming to sit among young people is one way of lowering the average age in the room, from which I benefit tremendously. The topic this evening for this 55th anniversary lecture, and I want to keep it short so we can get to discussion. I want to hear from you, because part of the point I'll be making in this lecture is really the importance of the Parliament being responsive. Yes, we have a duty to lead, but where you lead and how you lead really depends on the mandate that you're given from the people that you're led. I want to start really by offering my heartiest congratulations to the Barbados Community College on this achievement of the 55th anniversary. I was saying to Dr. Cadell earlier that context is everything. For the people of my generation, we understand the critical importance and the radical change that has been engendered by the Barbados Community College. For people of my children's generation who left here all of 2008, 10, somewhere that in that region there now, to show how old I am, they're now 33 and 36. They came here straight from secondary school. Even they perhaps would not have quite understood what was not there before the Barbados Community College became there. So I really want to salute you on your achievement. This college has made a significant contribution to the development of Barbados, and from its inception, it pursued the democratization of tertiary education with a revolutionary zeal. It not only expanded the traditional offerings of the sixth forms, which were limited in numbers, and as we had more people exiting secondary school, there was a problem in moving on to the next stage because of the limited sixth form places. But rather than being just a bigger one of what existed already, the Barbados Community College created new programs in arts, technology, health, hospitality, business, just to name a few. In fact, for those of you who, like me, like a bit of entertainment, you can hardly go anywhere now to be entertained by a group of musicians, including the the Barbados Police Service Band, without encountering graduates of this college. You can hardly go to a restaurant to have a meal without coming across a graduate of the Barbados Community College Hospitality Center, now with the Jean and Norma Holder Hospitality Institute. And it could go on and on. The Barbados Light and Power Company, the Barbados Water Authority, electrical contractors, Williams Metals, Coles Engineering, heavy industry, the Barbados Coast Guard. A lot of engineering establishments have benefited from the division of technology. A lot of the technical people, some have gone on to be engineers and draftsmen. We could go on and on. But the bottom line is this, that this is an institution that did not have another one like it before. And all of us have a responsibility in our time to be a pioneer of some sort. And I certainly would want to salute the pioneers in the late 1960s who created this institution. In fact, I once, as Minister of Education and a Member of Parliament, had to lead an amendment to the Barbados Community College Act. And I thought that just for the fun of it, I would go to Hansard and check the debates. And it was interesting contributions. The debate was led by one Lloyd Erskine Sandifer, former Prime Minister of Barbados, was Minister of Education and a pioneer of the Barbados Community College. And it was interesting back then that some less than enlightened members of Parliament were questioning if we really should make this investment. They were asking, do we have guaranteed jobs for these additional people that we're training? Not recognizing, of course, that was education and not training. Yes, there's a training component, but education allows you to go beyond what you are now and to see opportunities into the future. So I'm saying all that to give some context for you young kids, to not to take this institution for granted because it is here, it is well known, it is well settled, without the pioneers who founded this institution and made it different from what existed before, you will not have the opportunity that you have now. I want to express my thanks, of course, to the institution for inviting me to give a lecture on this topic, the role and function of Parliament, a reflective analysis. I welcome this opportunity to share some perspective with you as an active parliamentarian. And yes, I'm proud to say I'm a politician. Now, that usually produces a few sniggers as it does now, because, you know, when you think of politicians, immediately you do not think of heaven, you think of the other place. You do not think of the things that have happened well in the society. You think of things that aren't quite working. You think of potholes. But remember that this Barbados Community College was conceptualized by politicians. The bill to make it possible was passed in Parliament by politicians. The funding for it was approved by politicians, much against the criticism of some of the sixth form schools and the traditionalists who went through those limited number sixth form schools, who tended to like the exclusivity which limited numbers gave them. It wasn't a widespread, widely accepted matter. We do our thing. Yes, we take criticism. So I'm happy to be the butt of jokes and memes and so on. But remember this, we can give as good as we can take. We can tell a few jokes about you too. But in all seriousness, I've always wanted to be involved in politics. I'm proud that I've had the opportunity to serve my country. The only difference was that my plan was to enter around age 45, and I got a call at 32, inviting me to come into politics and to be a minister, and I didn't think it prudent to say to the ONAFA at the time, Skipper, call me back in 13 years, I'm a little busy now. So I dropped everything, and I went along. My kids were a little, just one was into primary school, one was now about to get there. My wife wasn't happy that I was going to be exposed to this treacherous world of full exposure in the public, but I thought that it was a price well worth paying for the opportunity to make a contribution to the country that I love so much. Just by way of context and give you perspective, because I'll leave this saying with you. One of my perspectives is this: how a man stands depends on where he sits. You may wonder what nonsense is that idiot saying. It is really saying the stand that people will take often depends on the position they occupy, where they are, whether it be in terms of their job position or where the view that they hold on the matter at a given point in time. And always remember that. And you never get upset with people for taking the positions that they do based on where they're sitting. That's the stand that you can pretty much expect them to take. Do not expect the trade union leader to tell you as the owner, manager, that you're right and you're doing all the right things. They will represent their worker. And you have to represent your interests. And we could go on and on with the examples. But I was asked to describe myself. And I said that I'm an economic development professional by orientation, an accountant by training, and a politician by inclination. Because those instincts have always been part of me. Whether or not they would have had a chance to be fulfilled was another matter. So notwithstanding the negative views people have about us and our profession, I think that it is noble, and I urge you as young people to consider service to your country by way of politics. Remember, if you go to a party on Saturday night and you have a good time, it's because somebody made it happen. Things do not happen in a country, in a world, in a community by accident or by everybody doing nothing. Somebody has to do something. So stand up and be counted. So enough advertising and so on for the time being. But I'm pleased, though, that the Barbados Community College, being the broad-based liberal institution that it is, has made this attempt to help students to have a better awareness of their political environment. And I was going through the materials for this this evening. I noticed that the course that around this is anchored is the course in Caribbean Politics and Society. And I found the short course description interesting. And it says, Caribbean Politics and Society is a multidisciplinary course that draws on the disciplines of politics, law, sociology, and history. Students will acquire a deeper understanding of political systems, structures, and institutions in the English-speaking, that is Commonwealth Caribbean region, as they examine related concepts, problems, and issues from both historical and contemporary perspectives. Essentially, this course is designed to enhance students' awareness of their political environment, making them more analytical in their thinking, and ultimately, more knowledgeable citizens capable of informed choices. It is my hope that all students of the college take this course, and indeed every student of a tertiary institution in Barbados should take this course or a course such as this. Because whether you have any interest in politics at all, what happens in the political environment is going to have an impact on you. None of us have an interest in, a material interest, let's put it that way, in Ukraine. But the fact that Russia is at war with Ukraine is affecting all of us. So whether it be global politics and understanding what happens, national politics, it is all important. So even if you're not a politician, you will be affected by what happens in the political space. So ladies and gentlemen, this evening my reflective analysis on the role and function of Parliament will be based on both elements of time and space. I'll examine the role and function of Parliament from both a historical and a contemporary perspective. The time will be from colonization and slavery through to emancipation, independence, and nationhood. And the geopolitical space will be Barbados with a few excursions into the Commonwealth Caribbean. I will examine how the society has influenced the role and function of Parliament and how Parliament has helped to shape the society. At the start, I want to make one assertion, and that is that although a functioning Parliament is a necessary and even a fundamental element of a democracy, the mere existence of a Parliament is not sufficient to ensure true democracy. And when I take my look back, you'll see what I mean. Let me also set the framework for this analysis and for our discussion, because I really want to hear from you. By outlining a few key terms. We use them and we assume that they all mean the same thing, but I will tell you what I mean, what I understand. I may be wrong, but even if I am, it's my evening and I'm entitled to define it how I want to define it. How's that? But since the period of independence and so on in the 60s and 70s in Commonwealth Caribbean, most of our countries can pretty much be described as liberal democracies. There are different types of democracies, but really they're liberal democracies. As such, our representative democracies, which is one of the features of liberal democracies, the representative democratic system, feature elections between multiple distinct political entities, political parties, independents, and so on. They feature a separation of power among the different branches of government, including and especially an independent judiciary. They feature the supremacy of the Constitution. And you heard in yesterday's news, interesting constitutional matters, the striking down of the prohibition of, as being unconstitutional, the prohibition from public officers being involved in politics. And from time to time you will hear of the courts striking down some constitutional matters or upholding them as being legal. In our liberal democracies, the rule of law is paramount in everyday life in our open society. We have a market economy which recognizes private property as well as the protection of human rights, civil liberties, and political freedoms. So to define this system in practice, liberal democracies often draw upon the Constitution to delineate the powers of government and to enshrine the social contract, the arrangement between the government and its citizens. And it will vary from time to time, from period to period. It may be tilted in favor of one or the other, but hopefully a balanced contract of what the citizens expect from the government and what the government expects of the citizens. We'll find some happy balance, not much in the past, but hopefully in the present and the future. With respect to Parliament, the structure is similar in the region with a few exceptions. That is that most of them have bicameral chambers. They have either president or a governor general as a ceremonial head, but we do have executive presidencies in Guyana and so on. In terms of our Constitution, it simply declares, at Section 35, there shall be a Parliament of Barbados which shall consist of the President of Barbados, a Senate, and a House of Assembly. And that is to say, sometimes when we say Parliament in Barbados, we think of the House of Assembly, because members of the House of Assembly are called members of Parliament. But the Parliament is the wider institution, which is the head of state. In this case, it was the President. Before that was the Governor General, the Senate, and the House. So we have a bicameral system, two chambers, and together they make the Parliament. So when the President or Governor General, as she was before, comes to a state opening to read the throne speech, he or she already attending their Parliament as a member thereof. So Parliament, in this context, as I speak this evening, is the full institution, not just the House of Assembly. At Section 48(1) of the Constitution, it makes the point that subject to the provisions of this Constitution, Parliament may make laws for the peace and good government of Barbados. That's what they're to do, make laws for the peace and good government. Of course, how you define that? What is peace? Is peace merely the absence of war, or is it the attainment of the good society, as outlined in classical literature? And what is good? Good for one may not be good for the other. And at Section 50, Part 1, or subsection 1, it says, subject to the provisions of this Constitution, each house may regulate its own procedures, and for this purpose may make standing orders. I don't propose to go too deeply into standing orders this evening, but if there are any questions on them, you can ask me. But the standing orders are the rules of procedures, like the guidelines and bylaws. It is how, it's like if you're in a club, and your club has bylaws, and it has rules about how the meetings are conducted, the notice period for calling the meetings. It provides certainty. And remember, one of the features of democratic government is that you can't trick anybody. You can't pull a fast one. So you can't knowing that John lives in St. Lucie, say that I'm convening the House of Assembly in 25 minutes, and poor John can't get from St. Lucie. There's a period of notice. You know, it cannot be that John comes and he doesn't know what is going to be on the order paper for discussion. You know, so there are very specific rules and so on. Also, to keep matters on course, you cannot just get up and talk anything that you like. No. Some of you may say in a cynical way that it doesn't stop us from talking foolishness, but you can talk foolishness on the matter before you, not on any other matter. So if you're debating a specific road traffic bill, it is not the time to talk about the fishing problem off Foul Bay, unless they have roads out there, because you want the debate to be focused and so on. So, but I won't delve into those procedural matters unless asked later. I want to reflect our roles and functions in the context of society and what you need to do. But more generally, across the Caribbean countries and across liberal democracies generally, if you had to set out some generic roles and functions for parliaments and parliamentarians, these are what, in my judgment, and from my experience, they would be. One, to represent the interests of the people. That's in general terms, but also specifically, if you are an MP, it also means representing your constituency. your constituents have a geographic definition. If you are in the Senate or another branch, it may be a sectoral interest, it may just be the people of the community, of the country generally. Another function and role is to check and approve government spending. So the budgeting process, passing laws for taxes, checking on government expenditure, being on the different committees and so on. So right now in the House of Assembly, they're conducting what we call the estimates process. So as we speak, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, they and their officers are in Parliament, in the House of Assembly, being questioned by members on detailed and specific line items in their budget. Because they're being given money, taxpayers' money, approved by Parliament to implement programs. And this expanded process, it wasn't always this way, but this expanded process allows members of Parliament on your behalf and mine to ask questions, to raise concerns, to get deep elucidation on matters before them. Another function, the third function, is to check and challenge the work of government, provide scrutiny, provide oversight. Because remember that within the parliamentary system, in our system, the executive, the cabinet, they're members of the Parliament, either in the House of Assembly or in the Senate. I was a cabinet minister from both. I was first a senator and then an MP, but for the 14 years, always a member of the cabinet. And the non-cabinet members are to check on us, whether they be in opposition or government, whether they be independent senators, part of the oversight. Because the old adage, of course, is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you really need to have that review mechanism. As we get further into the discussion, one of you will ask me about how is that possible in a small parliament? Yes, it is more difficult in smaller parliaments than larger parliaments. In, let's say, in the US Congress, where I believe there are 400 and whatever numbers there are, and the cabinet is not taken from that house. There's a strict separation of powers there, and from time to time, cabinet secretaries, cabinet ministers, as we will call them, are hauled down to the hill to be quizzed and questioned on what's happened. But we have a similar system here as well. Another duty is to make and change laws. So you make new laws or you amend laws. Another issue that is sometimes not noticed but is very important is really to debate issues of the day. To have discussions, public discussions on matters. And that happens sometimes in the course of amending laws, or sometimes there's a resolution to take note of and people, members are able to make discussion. And the final function I will note, it doesn't happen, well, let me say what it is first. To form and remove governments. Within our system, the government, the cabinet, or which group of people form the government is taken from the Parliament. When you elect members for your constituency, you elect that member. Whichever side ends up with the majority of members, they then have to meet and choose their prime minister. And their prime minister will then choose the cabinet. In 1994, we had what many Barbadians thought was only a legal mechanism that would never be used. We had a bit of a political crisis. Members moved a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister, and that no-confidence motion actually succeeded. Most no-confidence motions are just an opportunity for debate, because the sides line it behind their member, and the matter goes away. But in this case, members of that Prime Minister's team voted against him. He then had the option of either calling an election or resigning and letting someone else become Prime Minister. He called an election, lost, and the government was changed. But there are mechanisms in there that even outside of the date for an election, that there can be a change of government. It happens in relation to opposition parties as well. There was a situation in which some members from the Democratic Labour Party at the time, Dr. Richard Haynes and so on, resigned and formed their own party, the National Democratic Party. The Barbados Labour Party only had 3 members in the House, and they were the official opposition. Up until then, 4 members resigned from the Democratic Labour Party, formed the National Democratic Party, which meant that they had 4 members, and Dr. Richard Haynes became the leader of the opposition. Government was still the same, but leader of the opposition changed. So you can form and change governments within the system of Parliament, part of the responsibility of Parliament. So now that the context has been set, I want to embark on my reflective analysis on the extent to which Parliament has fulfilled its role and function over time. So the kind of historical analysis before we get to some contemporary issues. So I'll use Barbados primarily for this, because Barbados, we are happy and we're proud that we've had a Parliament in existence continuously since 1639, which makes it the third oldest Parliament in the Americas, behind the Virginia General Assembly and the Bermuda House of Assembly. This early assembly, of course, was created by the planters of the day, and in 1639, 16 landowners were chosen for what was called initially the House of Burgesses, soon to become the House of Assembly. Candidates for the House of Burgesses were required to be property owners, and indeed that requirement to be a property owner continued from 1639 right through to 1943. No, in fact, right up to probably 1950, because the last lowering of it was 1943, but it still existed. And that's important, because if you set a property qualification that the majority of people can't meet, you're by definition restricting the eligibility of people to be members of the House. And that is not consistent with high democratic principles. But that's what it was in 1639 and many years later. Interestingly enough, by as early as 1645, Barbados was divided into 11 parishes, and each parish thereafter had 2 representatives for the House of Assembly until that was changed sometime later. Another important milestone is that in 1652, Colonel Thomas Mudiford was elected as the first Speaker of the House of Assembly. And even in those early stages, the structure was kind of similar to what we have now, to the extent that we have what was called the old representative system, where the governor had pretty much all the power. He appointed a council, legislative council, who had oversight. It would be like a more powerful version of the Senate. And you had the elected members who in the early days had less power. They have more power now, because the idea is that the elected members should be the ones on behalf of the people who sent them there making the decisions. Professor Hilary Beckles, in his book, A History of Barbados from Amerindian Settlement to Caribbean Single Market, makes the following observation about that early colonization period, 1627 to 1650. And his observation, very important, was that only prominent men within the white community were considered by governors to be fit for political office. Indentured servants, wage laborers, blacks and Indians were excluded from administrative and electoral participation. And that continued and got worse over time. He also continued making the point, and I quote, as in England, Barbados' political culture was neither democratic nor egalitarian, and those without property, education, and status were not considered eligible for political rights. How different it is from today. In the colonial plantation economies, which were fueled by slave labor, the system of laws passed by Parliament, buttressed by a strong military capability, was used to maintain the dominant position of the ruling class. In the case of Barbados, 2 pieces of legislation exemplify this reality. The Mason Servant Code of 1661 was passed into law by the Parliament of the day, English planters, and that one was aimed at the Irish cousins. Ireland just next door, but the English always felt that the Irish were of a lower class. They were there mainly as indentured servants, and the law prescribed punishment for various offenses. The most severe was imprisonment for a year after having completed the agreed time of indentureship. But of course, they reserved the worst for another set of people. Also in 1661 was the first comprehensive slave code passed into law by the Parliament of that day. It was an act given this name, an act for the better ordering and governing of Negroes. There were amendments to tighten control in 1676, 1682, and 1688. And it pretty much existed in that form until it was repealed. Interestingly enough, the preamble to the Act, and as you get into reading legislation, reading the preamble often gives you the idea of what this is about. It's useful stuff to read. And it used terms to describe the Africans included heathenish, brutish, and a dangerous kind of people. The Code expressly declared, especially based on the 1688 amendment passed by Parliament of the day, that the enslaved were property and they were limited in every aspect of their daily work and social interaction. Penalties for a wide range of offenses included death for rebellion, for example, and for other crimes, punishments prescribed by law included the enslaved person being whipped, branded, having their noses slit, or a limb removed. And I should note for completeness that the presence of those laws did not prevent or did not dampen the natural desire for freedom of the enslaved black population. And there were ongoing escape attempts, acts of sabotage, and things that you or I would do if we were in such circumstances. Additionally, there were rebellions in 1649, 1675, 1692, some of which were snuffed out early, but the one in the Boston Rebellion in 1816 was able to be carried into execution. It inflicted much damage, but unfortunately did not achieve its goal of overthrowing the establishment of the day. Another significant point, I'll make these points, that there was a parliament, and the parliament made laws for the society reflecting its view of the society. And bear that in mind as part of the reflective analysis. Another significant point in the history of Barbados and the Commonwealth Caribbean was of course, emancipation in 1834 and the freedom following the enforced apprenticeship, which ended in 1838. But rather than the expected free market negotiation of wages and terms and conditions, which one would expect, you're free, your employers are over there, you're over here, and we're equal, that did not occur. What happened instead was that the planter-dominated legislature secured its own interests. Now, those things we frowned upon in today's context, where in governance, you frowned on conflicts of interest. But they were able, in those days, to pass a law, the Masters and Servants Act of 1838, and this became known as contract law, and effectively tied the newly emancipated workers to their employers and to the plantation tenantry that they rented. Many people colloquially call it the Located Laborers Act, because it pretty much put you in a situation that if you ran afoul, if you fell out with the plantation owner, he could tell you, take it to Georgia Mountain and move. And for those of you who are in the technology division and so on, or who are into architecture and whatnot, the chattel house. The house being able to move, chattel is movable property. And the design of the house was such that when you had to move it, you could dismantle it and take it away. When it was grown up, you still had to do that. Sometimes on the weekend, you would also go and help in the village. Someone was moving to a new spot, and you were able to take the house apart by the sides, load it on the back of a truck. By evening time, it was reassembled on the spot. And over the next few days, you would kind of harden up some places and fix back some boards and so on. But it was designed in a way by the craftsmen of the time to allow it to be moved to a new location, knowing that there was no security of land tenure and that you were at the whims and fancies of your employer and landlord in those times. So under this act, if a worker behaved in a manner which the planter considered insubordinate, he would be evicted from the plantation and could be imprisoned. And the penalty also included use of foul language, gambling, and other things which were already in the social sphere. And that act was eventually repealed in 1937. But the economic and political, and I'm picking just a few time periods. And my next time period is really the 1930s. That was another significant point in this journey of role and function of Parliament, what kind of society you had, and what were the issues of the day, and how the Parliament acted. But the economic and political crisis of the 1930s resulted in a structural crisis of the old order. This was perhaps the worst time for the plantation system and all that they stood for. As noted by Cynthia Barbados, and I quote, "In the post-emancipation period, the colonial ruling class throughout the Caribbean enacted legislation designed to limit the mobility of workers and to maintain the existing social, economic, and political relations in the colonies." She continues, "The coincidence of interests between the state and the property classes throughout the region was apparent not only prior to the 1930s, but also in their combined response to the unfolding crisis in the 30s. You will recall that the 1930s, around 1937, there were riots across, rebellion, revolt across the Caribbean, from the north down to south. And if you don't remember the historical facts, check Gabby's song, Riots in the Land, and you will remember it in song. But arising out of that, the British, the colonial office, sent down Lord Moyne, they sent down Dean, a number of commissioners to investigate why this happened and what needed to be done. Because clearly there was instability which they were not happy about. So the Moyne Commission report and the Dean report provided these insights. Winter Crawford, I'll give an example. Winter Crawford, who was a Barbadian nationalist and political activist, he sent a memorandum to the Moyne Commission, and he made the following statement, and I quote, "It is high time that this infamous tyranny, this system of fascism, better known as colonial imperialism, should be completely destroyed. There is no name too evil to be applied to a system which keeps thousands of workers in semi-starvation, denies them all human rights, and crushes with brutal military force any effort on their part to lift their standard of living." End of quote. And that was, of course, just a part of a longer submission made, really using his knowledge, his ability to articulate, to express really what was the plight of the majority of the people. Because you had a situation from colonization through to rebellion where the minority were oppressing the majority. You had, by then you had something at emancipation, from my memory, there were about 80,000 plus enslaved persons who were freed, and the number of whites then were about 12,000. So you had really a minority controlling the majority. But the rebellions of the Commonwealth Caribbean were the catalyst for significant political and economic and social change across the region post-1937. That is one of our seminal moments. The changes in that period laid the foundation on which the institutions that we take for granted today were built. The changes include, and some of these were based on recommendations of the Moyne Commission, recommendations from our local nationalists, Rantley Adams, Winter Crawford, all those folks. Universal adult suffrage, being able to run for office or to vote without having property. If you don't have a few $20 in your pocket, you could still run for office, or you could still go and vote. I mean, it's a fundamental, inalienable right. The formation of political parties, we take them for granted. So much so that nowadays we even ignore them. And people take pride in saying, "Oh, I'm not involved in any political party," as if there's a price to be won for that. But the truth is that even if you wanted to, prior to 1937, you could not. The formation of trade unions. And of course, I'm pleased to say, in relation to political parties, that my party, the Barbados Labour Party, was the first out of the blocks. We were formed, and out of us came the Barbados Workers' Union. But the formation of trade unions, because it is really the collective power, collective voices, either in a political sense, in political parties, or in an economic sense, as workers being able to bargain with employers. There's strength in numbers. Unity is strength. So you had the Trade Union Act being passed in 1939. You have the Barbados Workers' Union being registered on the 4th of October 1941. You had labor protection laws, and these were things that were missing. You had the Trade Disputes Act of 1939, Workmen's Compensation Act in 1943, just to name a few. You had increase public education in education and public health. And again, we take it for granted. There are people in Barbados today, students, your age, younger, older, who will hide from an education institution. They will run from it as if it's a bull cow before the chain. When opportunities were not there in the past. And I think we need to give some honor, give some respect to the efforts of our ancestors who fought to have the kind of expenditure on education and public health and sanitation that we take for granted today. We need to respect it, we need to use it, we need to build on it, because these things were not there. The majority of, if you read the reports, the majority of the population lived in squalor. Sewage ran in the streets. There was not the level of doctors and nurses. There was no hospital of the quality of the QEH and so on. We had the establishment post-1937 of a national insurance scheme to make provision for people when they got old people before having a state-organized pension system were left to suffer. You had internal self-government, including cabinet government. Ultimately, we had independence. Now we have a republic. So I make this to say that out of that rebellion, out of the voice of the people being too loud for the parliament to ignore, that you had changes, but of significance, of course, is that with universal adult suffrage, people were able to elect members of parliament who looked like them and who had interests similar to theirs. What you had before was that by limiting the ability to vote to property owners, obviously they will only vote for other property owners. So you did have the trappings of democracy and a parliamentary system, but by limiting the participation of the vast majority in the population, you were in fact not following through on those roles and functions that I outlined before. So with respect to that 1937 period, 1951 was, to my mind, the next important year, because that was the first year, or the first election, which was run with the ability of everybody who had reached the age, as it was 21 at the time, to vote. And anyone who reached that age to offer him or herself as a candidate to be a member of the House of Assembly. No property qualification. So I thought that I would highlight one or two important things in terms of how rapidly the role and function of Parliament evolved and how Parliament changed, and those some other things. So for example, in 1938, the Barbados Progressive League, soon to become the Barbados Labour Party, was formed. The House of Assembly was from 1938 on a 2-year election cycle. In 1944, the income qualification for voters was reduced from £20 or to £20 from £50 where it had been before. So it wasn't removed yet in 1944, but that amount of pounds, when I was a boy, the pound was worth $4.80 Barbados. And I didn't know what it was worth back in 1944. But how much of it was worth, most people could not see that kind of money. Interestingly enough, that £50 had been set there in 1884. In 1944, women acquired the right to vote. Women could not vote. And we must remember this. In this modern world in which we live, we sometimes forget that women have often borne the brunt of oppression in many societies. And unfortunately, there's still societies in the world in which that is the case. But our mothers, our grandmothers, our female ancestors were further down the pole than their male counterparts. So 1944 was the first year that they had the right to vote and so on. In the election in 1946, November, the Barbados Labour Party, led by Sir Grantley Adams, won 9 seats. Congress Party, led by Winter Crawford, whom you heard mention of, won 7. and the Barbados Electors Association too, and so on and so on. But that year was more significant because it was what was called the Bush experiment. Not Bush as in the one that we need to cut down from around the corners. Governor Bush, he gave the opportunity for cabinet government, and Granny Adams chose a cabinet at that time. In 1948, the term of the host assembly was changed to 3 years. In 1948 as well, for all of those hundreds of years of Parliament, it was in 1948 during election that Sir Kenmore Husbands, Member of Parliament for St. Peter, became the first black man to be elected and serve as the Speaker of the House of Assembly of Barbados. And in 1951, as I mentioned, was the first under adult suffrage, and in that election, the first woman to be elected to the House of Assembly was Dame Ermintrude Bourne, Edna Ermintrude Bourne, Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, and she served there until 1961, 10 years. In 1954, Granny Adams was the first Premier, and his other ministers were Gordon Cummins, Mencia Cox, Ronald Mapp, Edu Talma, and the First Leader of the Opposition was Fred Goddard. Other developments, we had what is now one of our major parties being formed. The Democratic Labour Party was formed in 1955, and from 1956, the House of Assembly became elected on a 5-year term. In 1956, there was an election, and Barbados Labour Party was returned to office, and you could go on and on. But 1958, I'll just blow past this for a bit, but in 1958 was an interesting time because in 1958, there was a federation was formed. Now, I want you, if you have time, if you're not done in your course, to spend some time on the Federation of the West Indies. I'm an unrepentant regionalist. I believe that we should still be the Federation of the West Indies, that if that federation formed in 1958 had not ended in 1962, that we would be in a much better position as a region today. The matters of resilience and diversity and so on that we're trying to do within within a country, or by economic arrangements like CARICOM, you had a single country called the West Indies. Our individual islands were like states, regions. So as in the United States or Canada or Germany, where you have a federal system, you have, so let's take Canada, you have the federal government, Pierre Trudeau Prime Minister. Each of the provinces, Ontario, Quebec, and so on, they have premiers, and each has a parliament. And you come down several layers of government, but all under Canada. In the United States, you have a president, and each state has a governor, and you have a state senate, and you come down, towns have mayors and so on. So we had an arrangement in the West Indies where 10 countries had gone together, had a constitution. I saw the constitution because I grew up here, but this federal experiment, it was no experiment, it was a real deal. There's a constitution. You should visit the federal archives, which are now at the University of the West Indies. There's a flag, cabinet papers, the cabinet met. So Grant Adams was the first prime minister. He had a cabinet that was chosen, and in his absence, there was someone else here as the premier of Barbados. Gordon Cummins was the premier of Barbados. But if you think about it, a single country called the West Indies would today have regions that are strong in tourism, like Barbados and those with nice sandy beaches and so on, countries that are strong in agriculture, countries with a strong industrial and petroleum base, as in Trinidad, Jamaica had aluminum. You had small places, large places, and if there's a hurricane in one part, your people could go and relax in the other part, all of the same country. And we can't change history, but just saying, for what it's worth, that I believe that that opportunity to build the West Indian nation, one people, one country, was a lost opportunity. But it is what it is. That having failed, that having been discontinued because Jamaica pulled out and then Trinidad pulled out, countries went to independence alone. Barbados became independent in 1966, and we're happy. We've done well. Just saying we could have done better. We've done well. In 1964, before that, the voting age was reduced to 18. So rather than 21, it became 18. In 1966, we became independent by the British Parliament voting the Barbados Independence Order, and we had our constitution, and so on and so on. And interestingly enough, before independence, we had a number of local government councils, and they were abolished in 1967. So we haven't had local government here. There was a Northern District Council, a Southern District Council, and a council for Bridgetown. Interestingly enough, there is a Thorn Commission which has produced a report on local governance, making proposals about how we can involve people more in their communities in decision-making about day-by-day matters that affect them, rather than everything being done at the central level from Bay Street and the various ministries. And the other last thing I want to say about how the system changed and evolved. In 1971, what were called double-member constituencies, where you had 11 parishes, 2 members per constituency, that was discontinued, and you had individual constituencies which have increased from 24 to 27 to 28, now they're 30. Some folks say you should never have an even number, because one day you may end up with a split government. You should have an odd one, so maybe we need to have another one. So that is how things have changed. But what else has changed? What did the Parliament now, in the post-1937, post-1951, what did they do? What were the pieces of legislation that they chose to spend their time and energy on? Because by their fruits you shall know them. If you want to know what a government or parliament is doing, look back at the legislation that they passed during their term. I gave some examples of legislation passed in the colonial times and so on, and what was the purpose. I won't give a whole list of it, we'll be here all night. But think about it. The Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. Now, again, for you youngsters here, when I was growing up in my village, hometown, Barbados Village in St. George, there's a small private tenantry, but Fairview Tenantry or Plantation Tenantry was nearby Draxall Tenantry, all around. By then, you were less likely to get put off the land. But the reality was this, you didn't own the land. So even if your child was working and getting some money, you couldn't go building any wall, toilet and bath on the people's land. So even where people had enough means, they did not have the security of tenure to be able to improve their homes and improve their lot. The Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act was passed by the government in the 1980s to mandate plantations in Barbados to sell their property. Because remember, the idea was not to take it away because that would be a constitutional issue. To sell it for what price? 10 cents per square foot. So 5,000 square feet of land costs you $500. When you drive around Barbados now to the plantations, as I go back into my hometown to have a little beverage and to shout some people and so on, when I go through Prerogative, St. Jude's, Birds Village, Greens, Woodland, and you could repeat this all over Barbados, and you see the large wall houses, sprawling wooden houses, you see the roads, you see the improvements. A lot of it is based on the security of tenure, transforming a significant number of people, if not the majority, to having the opportunity to own the land on which their ancestors had been living for many years, owned by the plantations on which their ancestors had slaved. So a parliament can perform the role and function of transforming society by creating a legislative space, by creating that legislative opening, Now that legislation did not go by without objection. There were people who objected to it and felt that you were taking away people's land and so on. But the word reparations was not used at that time, but in truth and in fact, it is a form of reparations. But it was also bringing stability and bringing hope to a substantial number of people in Barbados. So people who were born where I was born did not have to leave there to try to find land. Communities where 5 or 6 or 10 generations of Greenwiches or Griffiths were born and know one another did not have to be scattered around the island as we kind of are now looking for spots and developments. So there was a lot of social stability, economic stability, enfranchisement caught up in things like the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. We had, on another level, we had legislation to create a national insurance scheme, legislation to recognize, in terms of the psychological level, legislation to recognize national heroes, to look back on our history and identify Bussell as a national hero for leading the 1816 slave rebellion, and other more contemporary persons like Sir Garfield Sobers, whose exploits in cricket made us known throughout the world, and let people recognize that as a small country, we were capable of producing excellence. You had legislation creating Emancipation Day as a day to celebrate. It wasn't, August the 1st was not Emancipation Day when it was a boy growing up. In fact, people didn't really speak about it. So I won't bore you with the long list of legislation, but the Parliament of the post-1937 and 1951 period saw its role and function as developmental. To pass laws for the peace and good government was not about control, it was about empowerment. And that was a fundamental shift in the focus. But of course, by having trade unions, not civil society organizations, you had a press, free press, and expanding. You went from just having the nation to having the nation, sorry, from having the advocate to having the nation as well. You have a peripheral radio stations, you don't have social media. In a free society, where information is freely shared, parliamentarians are less able to do what they feel like doing in their own interests. And they have to take account of the interests of the people that they serve. And that's one of the fundamental differences between the society then and the society now. The society then defined an elector as a person with property. The MP had to have property to be elected, excluding the propertyless. But the role and function became more democratic. Now, in terms of some contemporary issues, and by the way, as I mentioned in the introduction, among the legislation was a Barbados Community College Act to create and empower the Barbados Community College. We could go on and on and on, but I wouldn't detain you that, because I want to get to your questions. But some of the contemporary issues, we cannot just sit by and say, oh, well, we've arrived because, you know, there's no longer public qualification, there's not the racial discrimination that there was embedded in the law, we have freedom, and so on and so on. Parliamentary independence. On the occasion of the 350th anniversary of Parliament, 1989, we took one of the steps that ensure that Parliament can spend its own funds. So the Management Commission of Parliament was created, it has its own legislation. The money from central government, yes, it has to come through central government, but it goes to Parliament as what we call a block vote, and Parliament decides how it is funded. There's still parliaments in the world where if the Prime Minister or Minister of Finance is not happy about things done or said in Parliament, he may decide not to send the money. You can't pay the staff. You know, so even though we don't have the numbers in terms of a large Parliament to ensure independence on that side, having it as a standalone entity is important. The other point I want to make too about that point about the size of the executive branch, the cabinet, as a proportion of the overall House of Assembly. Remember that part of those who are part of the check and balance in the Parliament are your independent senators. And for those of you who may hear the incorrect assertion that some people make, that the Senate is only a rubber stamp, it don't do anything, it can't do anything, the integrity legislation that was put up a few years ago by the government. Where did it fail? In the Senate. And why did it fail? Because there was a clear indication that several independent senators would not support it. And therefore it was withdrawn before you had the matter of it being squashed. And there are other times where senators have not supported it. I'm not saying that in any negative way, I'm saying it's a positive, because it means that if government, notwithstanding that government has a majority, our system is designed that for what we call simple things, for straightforward things, you want the government to be able to get on with its business. They will get their scorecard every 5 years, and they will get to keep their jobs, or they'll get fired. But you cannot have a situation, in my judgment, where you elect a government, but you make them so weak that they cannot make a decision. That everybody can just hold everything in abeyance. But there are measures that require amendments to the Constitution or other special embedded legislation where a 2/3 majority of both houses is required. And this is where the power of the Senate especially comes into play, in that there are 12 members appointed by the government, 2 by the leader of the opposition, where there's 1, and 7 by the president. Where there's no leader of the opposition, the president appoints 9. As the president does not vote. So you have 11 votes on the government side. 2/3 of 21 is 14. The government cannot on its own amend the Constitution or pass legislation with embedded powers that requires a 2/3 majority. So that's an important check and balance on the power of a government. So do not get caught up in the things you hear sometimes people say, oh, they can't do anything and so on. We have to make sure that we are able to be so convincing in our arguments as we put them forward as to be able to convince those to come along with us on matters. The other point I wanted to make is that Parliament in today's context, a little contemporary issues, part of the role and function relates to openness and transparency. And indeed, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and there's an organization for the Americas called Parliamericas, they stress on these as well. And what do we mean? It must be easy for citizens to know what is happening with their parliament. How many of you have visited Parliament's website? You know how to have one? Yeah, some have, right. You know how to have one, right? Now, remember, if you choose not to go to Kadooman, it doesn't mean Kadooman didn't happen, right? So, but Parliament over the years has really ensured that it is accessible. Parliament has a YouTube channel. It broadcasts on its regular website as well. You can log on all now if they're still meeting and follow what is happening in Parliament. It's broadcast on radio 94.7. Used to be 100.7, but now it's switched to 94.7 over the last month or so. And you can always find out what's happening. Not only that, if you want to know what the House will be dealing with, when the notice goes out to members, it goes up on the website as well. You can go and you can check to see what are the bills still to be debated by the House of Assembly, what are the bills before the Senate. You can go and see what has passed. And the other aspect of openness, apart from that electronic access, is that increasingly the House of Assembly is using the mechanism of select committees. And where there's select committees, there can often be joint select committees. So a bill comes up on which the government wants to consult a bit more. It was done with the Data Protection Act. It was done with the integrity legislation and several other bits of legislation. And it's introduced to the House. But then you have a committee of the House and the Senate that meets with the public. And the public is able to come to the Parliament, give testimony, make their input. They're able to write in as well. The average individual won't, but very often civil society organizations do experts. And this is a way that the Parliament is able to get the input of everyday citizens and groups that represent them to have that input and that openness. That was not a feature of Parliament in the past. The other myth I want to cast out, because I did hear some social activists say that there was some piece of legislation that would have been passed secretly or in the dead of night. It is not possible. Notice has to be given to members. When the matter is going to be discussed, it comes up on the website. If you don't pay attention, you may not see it. But the fact that you have not paid attention does not mean that it has not been broadcast for the rest of the world to see. So there can be no secret measures and so on. Transparency is enshrined in there. And the standing orders which Mr. Speaker in the House of Assembly and myself, we have to follow. It is our job to make sure the standing orders are followed, because we have to sign every piece that is passed. We have to sign to say it was done in accordance with the standing orders before it goes off to the President to be made into law. The other quick contemporary issues that I want to raise is that the world is rapidly changing. Our members of Parliament, just like you and all citizens, have to think globally whilst acting locally. Members of Parliament have to ensure that they invest in continual professional development for themselves, continually educating themselves on the issues of the day: climate change, sustainable development goals, international trade issues. So yes, you have your constituents in my case it was Silver Sands and Parish Land and Eland Park and Chancery Lane to represent, but you also have to make sure that you're able to contribute on matters related to gender and to human rights and to food security, to climate change issues and whatnot. So that ongoing education to make sure that where important decisions are being made, important discussions on matters of national importance are being had, that the quality of debate and contribution in the House of Assembly or the Senate are of a quality befitting the exalted status given to members by way of being elected or appointed to those chambers. And the world these days moves quickly. It can be fairly unforgiving for those who do not seize the opportunity to keep up with it. That includes you, and it includes members of both houses of Parliament. So in conclusion, I will close by repeating the assertion that I made at the beginning. I want to take your questions and answers. And my assertion was that although a functioning Parliament is necessary and even a fundamental part of democracy, the mere existence of a Parliament does not ensure true democracy. I also reminded you of the roles of Parliament, which are to represent the interests of the people, to check and approve government spending, to check and challenge the work of government, to make and change laws, to debate important issues of the day, and to form or remove governments. In my judgment, Parliament has not always been as representative as it should, and I hope that my analysis over time has shown that. However, we as parliamentarians of this generation have learned from the shortcomings of the past. We didn't have to get rid of the institution to reform it. We looked at what was not done as best as it could for the people of the time, and we are sworn to do better. So we've learned from the shortcomings of the past, and in the post-1951 era, the era after adult suffrage, we've transformed our Parliament to make it largely fit for purpose. We'll continue to change as needed to ensure that Parliament both leads and serves the people of Barbados. I hope that my reflective analysis has demonstrated that a robust participatory democracy is essential in order to ensure that Parliament acts in the interest of the majority of the people. However, let me be clear, democracy is not an inanimate object to be passed on safely in a box from generation to generation. Instead, it is a living, evolving organism that draws its sustenance from active citizenship and involvement by all citizens, you, me, all of us. You students of this tertiary institution that has revolutionized education, you are well placed to make meaningful inputs into the economic, social, and political development of this country. Please do not be a spectator. Be a participant in influencing the present and shaping the future. I thank you for your attention, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Senator Farley, thank you very much. To say that that was thought-provoking and insightful might be an understatement. Personally, I thoroughly enjoyed that walk through political history of Barbados. Thank you very much. As Senator Farley indicated, we've come to the point now where we will open the floor for questions, for your questions, students. As we prepare for that, I will ask Ms. Aline and Dr. Cattle to please take your seats in the audience. I'm going to invite Kamisha Hoyt, Tutor 2 and Course Coordinator of Core 102, to join Senator Farley. Ms. Hoyt will be the moderator for the evening, and she will be taking over from me for the remainder of the evening. So I will hand over to Ms. Hoyt.
Good evening, everyone. Formalities already established. We are at that exciting part of the evening where you know, the audience, get to participate and bring your question to the fore. We have an expert in the building, and we look forward to hearing from you with respect to your questions. What I will do, or I'll ask you to do as you approach the mic, just be mindful that you shouldn't stand too closely to avoid any sort of disruption. All right, so the floor is now open for questions.
Pleasant good evening to everyone. My name is Deveron Bruce, a previous student here at the community college as well. I really want to congratulate you, Senator Farley, for your presentation. It was quite insightful, and I thought that the reflective analysis was certainly there. But given our location, community college, the generation that we're dealing with right now, I believe most of us would have been, or them rather, would have been born probably after 2000. And although reflective analysis is important as a concept and a theme of tonight, I think this generation may be more interested, or equally as interested, I should say, in a more visionary and futuristic approach. So you mentioned that Parliament is a democratic institution, and that democracy is reflected through representation. So rather than all 300,000 Barbadians coming to Parliament to govern, we represent individuals to govern us. And that representation is in essence created through an electoral system. The electoral system in essence is fundamental to Parliament, given that it determines how Parliament is comprised and therefore how representation is practiced. Yet somehow we continue with a representative system that representatives are elected through an electoral system that is not in many ways democratic. I would consider it a dated democracy. You spoke, for instance, about 1987 period, where you had the infamous three-blind mice, so to speak. Then you had 1999, for instance, and I think more contemporary times, you would see 2018 and 2021, where the where the electoral system in many ways does not reflect what the voting population says. For instance, in 2018, the Barbados Labour Party won 76% of the national vote, but received 100% of the seats. In 2021, they received 70% of the national vote and received 100% of the seats. In 1989, they go back, for instance, where they received 70% and almost 100% of the seats. So in essence, our electoral system is dated. in many ways. It does not reflect the voter patterns of persons in Barbados, and therefore Parliament in many ways can be seen as undemocratic because it does not reflect the voting patterns of individuals, and that has, as you would know, several implications regarding governance, regarding procedural matters in Parliament, the Public Accounts Committee, for instance, various appointments, etc. So given your history in the lower house and being the president in the upper house, what are your views on the current electoral system, and what are your views on any potential reforms going forward to ensure that our electoral system does reflect a democracy, and therefore our participation and representation in Parliament is far more reflective of a modern democracy?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't think I'm on. Am I? Are you hearing me through the mic? Okay, all right then. Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Bruce. I may disagree with you on one thing. What I'm hearing you to suggest is a proportional representation model, which is an entirely different animal from the first past the post. I wouldn't. They're so different that you either have one or you have the other. But I wouldn't say that the first past the post is dated because it doesn't yield proportional representation. It is those countries in the world that use first past the post, they may modernize in other ways, but it is in many ways what it is not perfect. There are those who advocate the proportional representation model. One of the challenges with that model is that in the countries that practice it, you tend to end up with a slate of candidates that you know after the fact, as opposed to having your quote-unquote beauty contest, where you're able to see all the contestants beforehand. There are virtues in all of them, quite frankly. I've looked at all the different systems, but for me, I have no fundamental difficulty with, well, I should say I have no, the best of the worst. Given all the imperfections of the systems, I am happy to continue working with the first past the post system, where I think a lot of the improvements and innovations could come is in looking at how beyond the elections, which is a once in a cycle level of interaction, looking at how we can use information communications technology, the ability to be in regular contact with one another, to have a lot more active engagements on matters. And because the whole idea that you repose your proxy in a representative who exercises it in a manner of his or her judgment was fine, where it would have been difficult to get back to everybody. It's in Greece and so on, you can have a plebiscite because the numbers of voters were small. But the technology allows us now to have a number of fora. So let's take Parliament, for example. I would like to see the increased use of select committees. I gave examples of some legislation where it has been used, but the select committee allows for active participation of citizens in making direct input on the legislation as drafted. And in several in the cases where it was used, they actually got such good contributions from citizens that they went back and redrafted sections of the legislation to reflect some of the views that were advanced there. I think that in relation to other matters related to how government departments function or don't function, that having a series of online meetings to discuss reforms, to take inputs, to take complaints. So using the technology as is, we were able during COVID to have Parliament online, and that the same technology can be used to have more active engagement. The Prime Minister has started having town hall meetings where the government officials are there to discuss and hear directly from the people. That's just one example, but I think that a lot more truly participatory democracy can be practiced, whether you're using the first past the post or you're using the proportional representation system, because the choice of one or the other will only impact on who gets to walk up the steps of Parliament on the given day and how many. But then whoever is there still has, to my mind, to do a better job at more active engagement and ensuring that they really have a good sense of what is the will of the people. So the number of we have polling features in IT platforms. You could send a poll out to get a sense from your constituents of what positions you should take on a given issue and which directions they want to go on national matters or community matters. So yes, there are reforms that can be taken, but the choosing one system over the other will not be the end all and be all. Both of them will still need to ensure that there is active, ongoing citizen participation in matters of everyday interest.
We've started the pace hot and steamy from one former BCC student to another. We have another question coming from the audience.
Yes, please. Hi, good evening. My name is Roche Carter. I'm currently doing the paralegals program. I'm here with Mr. Seeley and his group. The question I have for you is, what is the rationale for not introducing money bills in the Senate? Also, does this make the Senate seem less important from the host of Assembly?
The principle, the old democratic principle, is no taxation for representation, so that the elected members are the members who are responsible for expenditure and so on, so that the supplementary and the additional votes do not come to the Senate. However, the Senate still has a voice in terms of the overall appropriation bill. So we will vote on, we'll meet the week of March 20th, and we will, our debate on this will be different from that of the House. We will have debate on the appropriation bill. We do not go into committee on the estimates, but you can raise any of the detailed line by line schedule of estimates matters within that 1 hour of second reading speeches. But the principle really has been that of no taxation for representation. And bear in mind, in terms of the history of bicameral chambers, where one is elected and one is appointed, it used to be that the monarch would appoint, or the governor acting on behalf of the monarch, would appoint people that represented their view or represented sectoral interests. And if they have, and they used to have more say than the elected members. The elected members were a kind of junior chamber. And over time, the thinkers came to the perspective that, in truth and in fact, the democratic process will be better served by having those who are elected by and therefore accountable to the people being the ones who would sign off on those money bills. The other issue, of course, is that if you elect a government, you need to give the government the tools to do what they need to do. If things work well, they will get a crown at the next election. If things work well, if things don't work well, they will lose their head in the guillotine at the next election. To have other people who are not elected and who will neither get a crown or a guillotine making decisions that could frustrate their ability to get on with the work really ends up being impractical. So I've looked at a lot of systems of the parliamentary systems around the world, and building gridlock and frustration into a system can be a lot worse than having one in which you have very clear lines of decision and you know who can make the decision and who to hold accountable for it.
Just as a general reminder to the audience, this session is actually being streamed live, and you will have the opportunity to rewatch the lecture as well as to hear the questions that are being asked.
Senator Farley, in your lecture you alluded to crossing of the floor in the 80s parliamentary period in the last 10 years too. What is your view about recognizing political parties formally in the process to the extent that when I vote, in my mind I vote for you because you represent a political party that I like. But then I put you in there and you join the other party or you form another party. And in the next election usually I don't vote for you anymore because you're not representing the party that I support. So do you think it is time for that reality to be reflected in the electoral process? So then that if you're elected on a particular party ticket, that it is clear to the voter they're voting for a party, and therefore if you change your allegiance, therefore you are asked then to go back to the electorate and get their support. Otherwise, you could only then merely sit then as an independent in the parliament and not seek to form a party or join an opposition party. But considering that you're being done, your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is that I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying where I am. But but in all seriousness, no, it is a difficult question. I think you have to give some balance between freedom of association and the right to associate, and then the matter of buyer's remorse, and where does that leave the electorate if you come to them with one set of credentials and then you change. But the other issue that arises sometimes is that there are times when members of parliament may be of the view that they need to take a stand, a principled stand, for a matter, against a matter. And the question is, how often, if you say that the only recourse is to go back to the electorate, how often in a 5-year term do you want to be going back to the electorate for a series of by-elections? No, there's no good or perfect answer. For me, the lesser of the two evils is to allow people, if they so desire, to cross. In Barbados, it hasn't often worked to anybody's advantage, and I think where the electorate is satisfied that there's good reason, they may get the support, but so far, generally speaking, not many of them, certainly in crossing was in Parliament. People may cross who are not elected, but I think the Barbadian electorate has not looked too favorably on the switching of allegiances during the course of a parliamentary term. But I'm concerned, I'll be concerned about increasing the likelihood of several elections during a parliamentary period. Small society elections cost, and I think that none of the two options are perfect, but I will go with siding with freedom of association and the right of choice.
We have another question coming from the audience.
Yes, please. Good evening. My name is Debbie Payne. I'm also doing the paralegal course. My question is, why are senators not elected if technically their functions are practically identical to that of members of the House of Assembly?
Well, the functions are not technically alike. The only thing that they share is the matter of making laws, but the matter then of representing constituents. Because remember, having done both things, there's a really, really big difference where you are the member of parliament for a given area. I have not been the member of parliament for Christchurch, East Norfolk, 15 years or however long it is, but I still perform representative duties because you get caught up in it as your community. And a lot of what you do is not what happens on the floor. It is really what happens at 5 o'clock in the morning when you get that call, or 7 o'clock in the night when you're making that visit to the old lady that needs to see you, you know, or 3 o'clock in the morning where you're going out, where there is a house fire or there's a problem and you have to mobilize the agencies, so that the senators do not have any of that constituency representation to perform. Actually, to me, the two most useful aspects of having a body like the Senate, I should say two things. In terms of bicameral chambers, you can choose to elect. You can choose to elect both chambers. It doesn't have to be all appointed, and you could have an election based on a different basis, so that you in several countries you have like smaller constituencies, and then you have a regional election for your Senate picks and so on. So there are multiple systems, and they're all up for grabs at this time. I think this is a good opportunity in the process of the constitution reform to sound out the views of the public and to go with one. So you can have both Senate and House of Assembly elected, but I'm answering the question based on what we have now. So what we have now, the two are not pretty much the same in my judgment. The senators are called upon to take more of a larger national view, and in fact, in our constitution, it suggests that the president, in appointing senators, needs to consider representation, sectoral representation, and they mention commerce, religion, education, before they give as examples. And the other useful mechanism there is that in terms of the ability to choose a cabinet, it gives a prime minister the option of going outside of the persons that have been elected in choosing a cabinet, which is a kind of a halfway house between those systems where the cabinet does not come from the parliament at all, like in the United States, and those where the cabinet is entirely of those who are in the parliament. So being able to choose from both houses of parliament is some say a useful mechanism. But I think I want to point out those differences. So I wouldn't say that they're pretty. So I don't agree with your assertion that they are pretty much alike. But the Senate can be elected if that is so chosen. That's the constitutional way to go, or it could continue to be appointed. I'm quite frankly easy with either option as is recommended by the Constitution Review Commission.
We have two questions from the audience, but I'll start with my audience member here to my right.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Katrina Edwards, and I am also
Could you speak a little
Good evening.
clearer for me?
Hi, my name is Katrina Edwards, and I am also doing the paralegal course. My question for tonight is, how effectively can Parliament, especially the House of Assembly, perform its role of scrutinizing government policy and holding a government accountable when there are no opposition members in the House of Assembly? Like the balance check.
Yeah, that obviously presents a conundrum. The Westminster system really assumes the existence of government and opposition. It's really a dialectical system, and the idea is that different ideas will contend, that the public will get to be able to see one view versus the other, but in addition to opposition parliamentarians, backbenchers are really supposed to scrutinize the cabinet. The reality, though, is that, as all the literature will show from the political scientists, that in small parliaments, there's always a challenge, really, of the non-executive members, the backbenchers, keeping the executive in touch, where the executive represents a significant proportion of the size of the parliament. That's just the reality of size. Now, one way of curing that, even in a small society, you could decide to increase the number of seats so that you have a larger pool of backbenchers. So you have a backbench that is larger than the front bench. Of course, the public may slaughter you and say, well, you know, do we really need more of these people? So it's a difficult one, but this is where the Senate as a review body plays a strong role, especially independent senators, because in cases, there are cases where, for example, even if they're going to vote for a measure, they may highlight some weaknesses, some flaws, may point out some legislation, for example, that may be perfect as it is drafted, but it has not gone on to include provisions that could have been in there. And I think really that the thought leadership, which can be, in addition to the vote that they have, which can be provided by the independent senators as part of the parliament, still gives you somewhat of a different or non-government voice. But really the system is designed by the architects to have that battle of government and opposition.
Senator Farley, I wish to apologize at this time for the pressure our BCC students are putting you under, but as an alumni of the institution, you should understand that we will apply great scrutiny and analysis when it comes to asking questions that are pertinent to such a topic. But we thank you for handling the pressure. We have another question from the audience.
Ruth.
Hey, good evening again. I must say that the dichotomy between the proportional representational system and the first past the post system is not necessary. We can certainly have both. We can simply create national seats at the lower house and have, let's say, 10 national seats elected by peer, and a pre-list system where we know who those individuals are. I certainly agree with you regarding the fact that democracy must continue irrespective of what electoral system we have. But back to Parliament, one of the key, I would say, responsibilities of Parliament would be its committees. And as we know, the Public Accounts Committee is one of the key committees of Parliament. Currently, we do not have an oppositional leader who can, in essence, form a quorum and appoint anyone to the Public Accounts Committee, but that issue has dogged us really long before the absence of an opposition leader. Remember the Constitution having to change under the Arthur administration, given the composition after the 1999 election, for instance. Beyond that, beyond the ability to form a quorum, you spoke about accountability and transparency, for instance. The idea of parliamentarians, in essence, being a check on themselves is problematic. In essence, you can't really promote accountability if the individuals who are governing then are responsible for checking amongst themselves. So accountability-wise, that is problematic. So when we think about the Public Accounts Committee, is it not time that we broaden the composition of the Public Accounts Committee to go beyond representation from parliamentarians, to include civil society, for instance, to include accounting bodies that you sit on, for instance, to include other individuals who may not have, I would say, the political biases that may exist that prevent them from showing up and frustrating the processes, and who bring a level of expertise to the process. Because when we're talking about government financing, for instance, and reviewing financing, that is an accounting issue, that is a technology issue, that is a procurement issue, that is a transparency issue. So bringing to bear the necessary individuals outside of Parliament who can have that objective perspective in the review of government finance, as opposed to parliamentarians being a check amongst themselves and on themselves. So broadening the Public Accounts Committee outside of Parliament. And I would say a majoritarian approach where parliamentarians are the minority on the PAC as opposed to majority.
Bear in mind that the Public Accounts Committee is one part of the process. The real objective work has already been done by the Auditor General. The Public Accounts Committee is not the only oversight mechanism. In fact, the Public Accounts Committee considers the financial statements and the report of the Auditor General and does further work. I think, though, that one of the principles, though, of our parliamentary system relates to Parliament regulating its own affairs. I think that was the input of non-parliamentarians would be useful. You have joint committees of Senate and House, and you can also have non-parliamentarians involved. I would not necessarily go as far as having the majority for example, for me personally, I prefer to have my Speaker of the House of Assembly as a member of the Assembly rather than as in Trinidad, for example, where it's a matter of choice. But just give you my perspective that, yes, so some infusion of additional views and perspectives on the Public Accounts Committee and some other committees would be fine. But I still think that the majority there should be parliamentarians. I think, quite frankly, though, that one of the things that we may have to face is that if we are to achieve some of the goals that we set ourselves with these committees and other institutions of Parliament, is that we simply have to recognize that the numbers are too small and increase those numbers as well. So between increasing those numbers, bringing in some outside views, which I don't think should be a majority, I think they should be part of it, but not the majority. And that certainly would be as far as I will go.
We have two other questions coming from the audience.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tamara Jordan. I'm also a paralegal student. I have two questions. I don't know if Senator Farley wants me to list them together or he wants to answer one and then...
Can you ask them separately?
Yeah, sure. You mentioned, Senator Farley, you mentioned in your lecture that notice has to be given before acts can be passed by Parliament to support transparency. Can you tell me approximately how much notice in advance should be given?
The standing orders, usually 5 days notice according to standing orders.
Okay. And question number two, what are your views in terms of non-functioning the recall of non-functioning parliamentarians?
Recall is a very interesting mechanism. In principle, I have no challenge with it. The matter of functioning, I think, though, has to be properly defined, because the truth is that there are many cases in, let's say, in regular employment, where employers don't define what the key performance indicators are, and they want, when it comes time for bonus at the end of the year, to tell you, oh, but you should have done so and so, before telling you at the beginning of the year what they are. So in principle, I have no issues with the principle of calling people to account by recall, but that needs to be accompanied by some element of clarity in terms of what are the proper triggers, and to ensure that it will not be misunderstood by either. The MPs will be clear on what these performance indicators are, as would the constituents be.
In terms of your answer, you mentioned that, okay, is there a process that the MPs on the go to check, like you have progress reports, is there a process where MPs and their duties and what they do on the go, and if so, if some seem to be lacking in their productivity, if anything is done or said about it, what are there particular guidelines to follow?
The usual reporting mechanism for MPs will be their meetings with their constituents, which will be a series of initiatives, from their monthly meetings held, hosted by their branch, to some host Zoom meetings. There are a number of them that are in WhatsApp chats with communities, to the Saturday morning walkthrough, knocking on the doors to chit chat. So the real progress is not to the Prime Minister or to Parliament. The report is to the members of the constituency. And so different constituency MPs would use strategies depending on what works for their constituents. So when I was an MP for some communities, that was done through a meeting at one of the neighbors would host a meeting with the group on that street, for example. Another set of people would come to the constituency office. Another set of people would be on the telephone. So it really varies. Being the member of Parliament for example, a widely spread rural constituency, would you more likely use different approaches to getting his or her message out than that in a very tight, small geographic urban space. You know, and I think it's really a matter of what works at the end of the day, and the ultimate power lies with the people. If they're satisfied that the MP has done his work, you get re-elected. If not, out through the door. You had a second question.
It seems her question was answered.
Oh, okay, right.
Yes, we have one other question from the audience.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Letitia Bourne. I'm the head of the law department. Very proud tonight of our students. The question I have for you, I'm a bit of a history buff as well. You gave a lot of information that some of which I knew and some I didn't, and was very interesting to see when you walked us through the earlier part from colonization and coming all the way forward. I saw then that you said that there were lots of barriers that were broken down, like Tenantry's Freehold Purchase Act and those kinds of things. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the new barriers that would now have to be broken down, or that should be broken down, of a similar nature but a more modern nature, and what would be the role of Parliament in breaking down those new barriers, as they would have done with those acts that were, you know, forms of social engineering?
Could you give an example of one of those barriers?
Well, you would have spoken about in particular, the Tenantry's Freehold Purchase Act, that then persons were able to buy land, and then at 10 cents per square, the 10 cents per square foot, the plantation tenantries. I think you spoke about workmen's compensation, the fact that women then got the vote, and the removal of the property qualifications. So I guess what I'm wondering now is, what is Parliament's new role? Does Parliament have a new role in terms of doing something similar to what it did before, in terms of the needs of society as at this time, especially having just come through the pandemic and the world shutting down and changing, and people have pretty much emerged from the pandemic as, I'm going to say, kind of different people. What role then can government play, or at least what stronger role can government play? You did speak about climate change, and I forgot the other one that was very burgeoning, but climate change was one of them that you spoke about, and I'm thinking that is a role, but what greater role or additional role government can play as at this time?
Sure, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you take that as a government issue and not just a Parliament issue, there are some matters that require law. There are other matters that require policy that can be executed within the existing law. So what tool that is used to address the problem depends on the nature of the problem. So some of the housing issues, just to use that as an example, were addressed by legislation, yes, but a lot others were addressed by the government acting as property developer to be able to sell or to transfer the properties at an affordable price. So that I think that in terms of job category, the categories remain the same. It is really for the government from time to time to identify what the issues are. In terms of climate change, for example, some of the challenges we face will be improved sea defenses. So in our time in government, for example, we had started facing erosion on the south coast, but where KFC is, for example, and that boardwalk out there is not designed primarily as an aesthetic. It is really a coastal defense to prevent erosion in heavy seas. But rather than making it just ugly rocks, we decided to dress it up as a boardwalk and have the recreation benefit. That did not require any additional legislation. However, you may find that in relation to other aspects of coastal defense, legislation may need to change that defines the high water mark. The high water mark, as you will appreciate, is defined or changes based on accretion or seas coming in. So in Bay Street, for example, the high water mark is not where it used to be when I was passing there in the 70s going to school. When you walk on the Bay Street Esplanade on the concrete section, from there you step into the water. You have this large beach. So I'm saying that whether it is a legal amendment which requires Parliament, or it is an executive action to executed by the government department, which is the cabinet and allocating funds and so on, will be driven by the nature of the problem. But I think really that what is fundamental is for members of Parliament, as people who will be making these important decisions, to make sure that they continuously improve their knowledge and awareness of this new world that we're in, to be able to recognize threats that exist, to be able to identify opportunities for action, and to determine what those actions will be. So that being a good MP, as important as that is in terms of your piece of geography, that's one important job. But then you still have to pay attention to what is happening, what are the geopolitical forces, what are the political scientists like Brother Bruce identifying. They may have done research on problems or solutions in other parts of the world that they've put to us that we can learn from. What is the university doing? So we need to follow university research, we need to follow the academics, we need to follow what's happening in other parts of the world. Not just rich countries, but poor countries, resource-scarce countries that are solving problems, because we're both a first and third. We have features of both a first and third world country. So continuing professional development for parliamentarians, in the same way that I have to do continuing professional development to maintain my accounting license. I have to do 40 hours a year, of which 20 must be certified to continue. So I'm not saying it has to be done in that mechanistic way, but all of us who serve in the parliamentary space, we really do have a responsibility to ourselves and to the people that we serve to keep in touch, to know where we are, do a risk assessment, what are the risks that we face, what is the policy space that we have in which to operate, and also be prepared to make the tough decisions, because with an increasingly of the situations where you have, there are always budget constraints, you don't have an unlimited amount of money. And someone has to make the tough decision that in order to do this new thing that is important, I may have to not fund that old thing which is not as important or as much of as a threat to us. So that would be the approach that I think would need to be used: awareness, risk assessment, see what the opportunities, and determine the course of action, be it legislative or through the ministries and departments, allocating spending for action to be taken.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be taking 2 more questions from the audience.
Yes, sir.
Good night, Senator Farley. My name is Joshua Harris. I actually do have 2 questions, so hopefully someone else can ask.
Yes, of course, of course.
Okay. I would like to apologize first of all, because one of my questions will put you in the hot seat, okay? Do you believe that a person 18 years of age should be appointed to the Senate?
Given the hot seat nature of that question, I'll pass on that.
Alrighty. Second question. I guess we can all agree that the first past the post system produces disproportionate results. And so my question to you is, in the instance that we do have a 15-15 House of Assembly, what process then would we take to elect a Prime Minister if neither party can succeed in drawing one person across the aisle? Would we look at the percentages that each party received, or how would the Prime Minister be elected? Would the former one stay on? What would happen?
Well, the Constitution still takes care of these things. Eventually, if no government can be formed over a period of time, then you have to go back to the people.
Okay. Question answered.
Yeah, which I'm sure the people take the opportunity to make sure that they have they make a definite decision. The reality is that Brother Bruce can tell me if he agrees, but my view of elections over the years is that they have 2 components: what I call the presidential or prime ministerial component, and they have the constituency component. depending on what's happening, what the issues are there, who the personalities involved. Sometimes you have Barbados voting as one constituency, so that's where you have a prime minister. People vote for a prime minister, and those ones tend to produce those kind of results. There are other times where people are more into the parochial and they're choosing their constituency representative. So you essentially have 30 by-elections, and sometimes you end up with a national situation that you didn't anticipate. So I think really that depending on where the balance lies in a given election, you can kind of sense if you're going to get everybody being swept along based on that presidential, prime ministerial pool, or where people are reading out. And sometimes you do get, in both situations, you do get unintended results. Because a person may assume, I think John will win the national government, but you see, Harry, I don't think again, he will make constituency. And if you get 60 of them doing that, poor John, look up. So it's always an interesting thing to have a sense of what's happening. But no political system is perfect, really. The question is which one presents which is most appropriate. And I think increasingly around the world, I'm seeing mixed systems being used. People are taking the best of different systems, using one type of system at one level of election, using another. So New Zealand and other places have. So the proposals I'm hearing in Barbados for the kind of constituencies we have, and then some regional or parish level elections, and the ways in which you could give opportunities for people who may be of more national appeal to be voted on in that way, those who may be better at street by street community representation to be voted for in that way. And I think really that whatever decision is made, I think it is clear that the system that we've had it for a long enough time that it can be up for review. And that the opportunity should be taken. Yes, we will hear all of the bright and brilliant folks, we hear all the experienced folks, but at the end of the day, this is an opportunity that not into constitutional reform, a proposed parliamentary commission, and we're in a moment of change for us to really take stock of what the people want and make sure we create opportunities to enlighten them on what is there, what the options are, and hear from them what they want. Because at the end of the day, whichever system we choose can only be successful if it has the confidence and buy-in of the people it is intended to serve. Because otherwise you're going to get buyer's remorse, and the one thing that you don't want is buyer's remorse with the Constitution and the structure of political representation and so on, in terms of the structure. So I think that that's where we'll rest on that one for now. But it's an interesting moment, and I really am pleased that students are as active as students are supposed to be. You all are at the stage where you all are supposed to be changing the world and knocking us old boys around the head. I was like that. Still am to some extent.
So we have our two final questions coming in. Or I should say two students. I'm not sure in terms of the amount. But again, Senator Farley, I want to profusely apologize for the pressure that our students are putting you under, but you are firm in this task.
I served in the House of Assembly on the opposite side from David Thompson, David Eswick, Michael Lashley, Richard Seeley. I had a formidable team on the other side, and you couldn't want more fire than on those days. So
all right, so he is
no problem.
He is able. Good. All right, so we'll take the last two questions from our audience members.
Good night. Thank you, Senator Farley. A lot of food for thought, I will say. But this is just to hear your views. What are your views on the recent court's decision allowing public officers to take part in elections? That's one, and then two, this is just to pick a bit of your history when you would have asked about, when you said rather, why women could not vote back in, I think it was 1944. Right, I just want to hear a bit why women could not vote back then. So that's just my two.
I'll take the last one first. What was said in 1944 was that it was the first time in which women were permitted to vote, because they had been prevented from voting before. So as the as the level of undemocraticness was reduced gradually. 1944 was the time when women were permitted to vote. They, however, still had to meet the income qualification that was in place at that time. So it was flipping the other way. So for all the years before, they could not vote. And it was making the point that on too many occasions, women have always been made to be second-class citizens, and where reforms are happening, they happen for men first and then women afterwards, and so on. So their moment of freedom came in 1944. And then on the matter of the public officers, I've learned to be, no, I'm serious. There are two things I'll teach you. I'm not an attorney, but the time that I spent in cabinet and talking to lawyers and so on, I've learned a bit. So for example, we're, in regular discussion, a person would say, I have an opinion from my lawyer that says so and so and so. That's fine. I ask him to see the question. Because the opinion of the lawyer is based on the question that was posed. What is the opinion being rendered on? If you change a full stop or comment in there, it may change the response. I've learned as well that in relation to courts, that what you hear as the oral decision is fine, is as accurate as it is. However, to fully understand implications, you want to see the written decision. And if you read the decision, you will see it indicates what were the issues put before them, what were the decisions based on, what legal authorities, and any other further instruction. So that I will want to see what the written decision is to know implications. So, because what does involvement in election mean? Now, involvement in political matters. Now, you could be involved as a branch member, you could be a president of a branch, but you're not a candidate in an election. Does this reach the candidate level? Does it not? Is it that the regulation was fundamentally wrong in terms it shouldn't have gone any distance along the road, or did it go too far? So I've learned enough to know that when it comes to matters of these very important court judgments, and it's so great that we can get these judgments, and I just hope that sometimes there will come some judgment, like some matters that are before our courts will be concluded even more quickly, so that we don't have the amount of time. But for sure, the written judgment will be very important, that we can see exactly what the decision is and its implications.
And our final question for the evening.
Hi, good evening, sir. Reginald, you're a paralegal student from Marcel's class. My question to you is, do you believe a Prime Minister exercises too much power over Parliament?
No. Like all beliefs will come without a continuum. For me, I do not believe in putting anybody in a boxing ring and tying one hand behind their back. So if I hire you to be the manager of my company, I should not be in there but about every day undoing what you have done. I give you your course, I give you your room. This is my expected rate of return. These are my governance rules, so on and so on, and you run your thing within the scope of those rules. And similarly with countries. So this goes beyond Barbados and beyond this present Prime Minister. I've always believed in giving Prime Ministers enough space to make decisions and take actions and be accountable for them. And if you doubt that, and if I remind you that Prime Minister Sandiford was the Prime Minister acting under the same laws as our President now. When he was not able to persuade or direct his members to support him in the things that he was proposing to do. So you know that 4 ministers of tourism resigned within a given period. He had to be changing them, and then matters came to a head, and so on. So I'm just saying that mercifully these things don't happen every day, because I don't like political systems that tend to be unstable, because it creates turbulence in the marketplace, in people's lives, and and the ability to plan. So I don't think that as it stands now, and has been over time, that any Prime Minister of Barbados is so powerful that nothing can be done to stop them. If that was the case, Prime Minister Sandiford would have gone on until sometime after. And also, you do need to make sure that you are not asking a Prime Minister to take on the job of leadership of a country, any country, but still preventing them from making decisions and taking actions consistent. Make sure that the laws dealing with ethics, making sure the limits of power are clearly defined, but there should be enough power within those definitions to make sure that what you're holding them to be responsible for, they can actually take the action on, because it's one of the principles of accountability that you judge people based on what they actually have the decision-making action on. So to put me in charge of putting out the garbage, and you're going to judge me on that, but I don't have the key to the garbage bin, to the garbage, locker thingy, and then you judge me on that. Give me the key. If you come out and you find the dogs can out the garbage, it is my fault, because I have all the tools, But I think we sometimes want to be too unclear in our lines of authority. But I rather, in terms of governments that can get on with their work. I'll give you a quick example as I close. In the United States, I watched that system carefully. Interesting system. The Americans were clear that they wanted to elect a president, not a monarch. So the president of the United States, for all of his world power and the size of his country, is not able to do quite a number of things within the United States. But that system also assumed that only reasonable persons of sound judgment would be able to get past the various rungs of the electorate to get to the House of Representatives or the Senate. And I remember in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s watching United States Senate and House committees meeting, watching the reconciliation committees trying to reconcile a bill from the House, the bill from the Senate, meeting at the White House, coming to some understanding, and governing from the center. As they say, you canvass in poetry and you govern in prose. And that was the case. We've seen situations where not only poetry, but all kinds of lyrics are going on right up and down the chain. And the fact that the rules that assume that there will be reasonable people who will reach consensus and allow the president to get on with what may not have been his original idea, but what is now a consensus position. That is now being challenged by consensus and shifting your position, being seen as a sign of weakness and so on, and you have these camps. So I'm just saying that that I look at that situation and I say, I think a situation where there's greater certainty. So for one, I like the parliamentary system as we have and the UK has. You've seen a parade of UK prime ministers, one who only lasted 2 months, but it's clear. You go in, this is what you need to do. If you fail, we take you out and you roll. But the accountability is there. In the United States, I'll watch to see how it plays out, because you could have a president that ends up not being able to get things done because of the nature of the system, and it was designed that way. But on the assumption that people would cooperate and that they will, all three, the president, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, they will not each get what they want, but they could find a space where they could get something that they could live with. In the absence of reasonable people, that system isn't going to work, and I will wait to see then how a president, this one or the next one, gets judged by the electorate for the country, where he's not able to do the things that he may have wanted to do. So for me, if I have to choose any political system, Barbados or anywhere, I would always give that little extra room for the leadership to be able to take some decisions, and I will hold them accountable for the decisions that they took with the latitude that I gave them.
Ladies and gents, Members of the audience, thank you for those robust questions that you presented this evening. Senator Farley, you made it.
Yes, thank you.
I now will turn over the floor back over to Ms. Brooms. My role as moderator has ended.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hoyt. You too handled yourself well. Appreciate it. So we've quickly come to the end of the evening, and I'm going to invite Katrina Edwards, a first-year paralegal studies student, to deliver the vote of thanks. Ms. Edwards?
Good evening. His Honor, Senator Reginald Farley, President of the Senate, Principal of the Barbados Community College, Ms. Annette Aline, Registrar of the Barbados Community College, Mr. Roger Worrell, Senior Tutor in the Division of General and Continuing Education, Dr. June Caddo, Senior Tutors and Tutors of the Barbados Community College, Principal of Christchurch Foundation School, Mr. David McCarthy, members of the media and other specially invited guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am pleased to deliver a vote of thanks on this very special occasion. I do this on behalf of all who have been so privileged to experience this opportunity and to share in this moment here together this evening. Firstly, special thanks goes to Ms. Annette Aline, our principal, for her welcoming remarks. I wish to extend a big thank you to you, Mr. Senator Reginald Farley, for your informative lecture on the role and functions of Parliament. This lecture has piqued my interest in relation to parliamentary affairs, and I know that I can say the same for my fellow students gathered here this evening. Senator Farley, you not only graced us with your presence as an experienced parliamentarian, by sharing your knowledge, but your former profession as a teacher has stood out. May you permit me to say, once a teacher, always a teacher, and you fit that bill, sir. Your lecture places the role and functions of Parliament at the center of our governmental system, and I know every person here would have gleaned some information that has enhanced their knowledge. I would like to thank the principal and staff of the Barbados Community College for providing each student with the diverse programs and courses, such as Caribbean Politics and Society, which are essential to overall learning. Specifically, in this, the 55th year of the college's existence, we look forward to more thought-provoking and informative lectures. Every orchestra needs a conductor. For their roles in contributing the flow of this event, we thank our public relations specialist, Ms. Lisa Broom, and coordinator of Core 102, Caribbean Politics and Society, Ms. Kamisha White. To my fellow students, thank you for your attendance and the questions that you posed. They allowed for a greater knowledge base. I'm sure that our tutors can look forward to the rest of the semester with a class full of zeal. I can, without a doubt, say that we have all been inspired by this evening's proceedings. I also wish to express my gratitude to the Media Resource Center of the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, and the Maintenance and MIS departments at Barbados Community College. We appreciate Mr. Nick King's role in working with Mrs. Wendy Cox, Mrs. Petra Emmanuel, and the mass communication students for the streaming of the event. Finally, I want to thank Mr. Mark Seal, my tutor for Caribbean Politics and Society, and my class colleagues for providing me with the encouragement that is required to be able to stand before you to give this vote of thanks today. Once again, thank you.
Well, all that's left for me to do is to thank Ms. Edwards for that vote of thanks. Again, as she said, thank you all for coming out Senator Farley, a big thank you. And here is where we wrap up the evening. I wish you safe travel to your homes, and you come back tomorrow ready to go once again. Good evening.